Hey everybody, I'm Tim Selby. What's going on? Well, I'll tell you what's going on here at Heart of Steamboat. We are working our way towards the celebration of Easter. And to do that, we've been taking day by day, going through the journey of Jesus on that final week. For those of you keeping track at home, today we talk about Wednesday. It's a short day in the Gospel of Mark, but a real meaningful day. You know, the journey to Easter runs through the cemetery. We all wish it didn't. We all wish that our GPS device could reroute us another way to get there without going through the cemetery, but it doesn't work that way. We've all been there. We've all stood at the graveside in front of a stone, just one stone in the midst of a sea of stones, but that stone means everything to us. It's as if our heart is held inside of it. We've all been in the hospital waiting room with the bright lights and the sanitary smell. We've all gathered around the bedside to offer prayers or to give a blessing or to hold a hand. We've known the claustrophobic grip of grief that we cannot escape. Oh, if there was only another way, if we could only find another way through. God knows we try, right? If we just eat enough kale or exercise enough. We all try not to talk about it and to think happy thoughts. We tell our friend that he looks great, but we know he'll be dead in a couple of days, and so does he. But to acknowledge that just seems so painful, so we tiptoe softly and drive around in the circles. All too often, we end up feeling more and more alone and isolated. But it's not really our fault, is it? It's just a natural response to this painful reality. Of course we wish there was another way. I think it's a reality we see clearly in the disciples of Jesus who don't want to know this as well. In the Gospel of Mark, there's 3 times when Jesus tells his disciples that he's going to die, but they can't hear it. First time he tells them is in the 8th chapter of the Gospel of Mark. And he says, I'm going to die. And this is a time when Peter rebukes Jesus. He says, Jesus, not you. And Jesus rebukes Peter as well, saying, you, Peter, get behind me. Then in the 9th chapter of the Gospel of Mark, he tells his disciples that he's going to die. And this time it says, but they don't understand. They don't know what he's talking about. But it says, and they're afraid to ask him any questions. They don't understand, but they're afraid to ask, afraid to talk about that. And the 3rd time is in the 10th chapter. He says, I'm going to die. And you know what they do in this chapter? The immediate response they have to him telling them that he's going to die is to ask him a question. And here's the question. Jesus, which one of us will get to sit on your right and left in glory? Can you imagine? So in chapter 8, Peter rebukes Jesus. In chapter 9, they just don't understand, but they're afraid to ask. And in chapter 10, they are utterly, eye-rollingly clueless in that place. 3 times this happens. All of this is to set the stage for what happens on Wednesday in the Gospel of Mark. On Wednesday, it's a very short reading for that day. It's basically chapter 14, verses 1 to 11. This chapter is all about death, and it comes in this form. There's a brief piece at the beginning of the chapter there where it says the chief priests, they want to find a way to arrest and kill Jesus. But they know they have to do it in a stealthy way. They can't just do it. They have to be stealthy about it because they're afraid of the crowd. Are you getting this theme? This has been running through this whole week. They're afraid of the crowd. They want to find a way, but it's got to be by stealth. Then there's a story that Jesus tells, and then we hear a conclusion of the chapter which relates to the first part of that chapter that I just told you. They want to find a way to kill him, all right? And what Mark does quite often in his writings in the gospel, he'll start a story, then there'll be a story in the middle, and then he'll finish the first story. It's called Markan framing for you theological nerds. So this framing happens. And so, but it concludes with, it begins with they want to find a way to kill him, but it's got to be by stealth. And it concludes with this, and Judas goes to them in order to betray Jesus. So this chapter begins with they want to find a way, and it ends with they have found their way. But in between that there's this story, and this story is about death as well. In this story, Jesus goes to dinner at the house of, get this, he goes to dinner at the house of Simon the leper. Now, I can't imagine that dinner invitations to the house of Simon the leper would have been in really high demand, but here we are. It's Jesus, right? So of course Jesus is there with him. Of course he's at the house of Simon the leper for dinner. And in the course of this meal, a woman comes in. She just seems to come out of nowhere. And in that day and age, I'm sure she didn't belong there, but she just comes in out of nowhere. And she's got this ointment, this oil, this perfume, super valuable. She takes the bottle of this perfume and she pours it over Jesus' head. The people there are scandalized about the perfume. They say, why did she do this? This could have been sold and the money given to the poor. And you know what Jesus says? Jesus says, leave her alone. You will always have the poor with you. You will always have that work to do, but you won't always have me. And this woman has shown me a kindness. And in this kindness, she has anointed my body for burial. Once again, he talks about his death. She's anointed his body for burial. So this amazing woman in this moment does two powerful things. She pours it over his head. Now this is symbolically important because in the kingdom of Israel, the way you anointed the king was to pour oil over their head. That was the anointing of the king, all right? And we also see the powerful words of this anointing in the famous Psalm 23. Even though I walk in the shadow of death, your rod and your staff comfort me. And you anoint my head with oil. So she does two things here. She anoints him. She's proclaiming him king. He is the king. And she anoints his body for its burial. Because see, those disciples, all those times he talked about his death, they didn't hear him. Maybe they didn't want to hear him, but they didn't understand. This woman listened closer. She heard Jesus. She heard him talk about his dying, and she let it in. She listened, and she let all of him in, and then she blesses him extravagantly with this perfume, this sweet perfume that's so expensive. It's symbolic of her. She's pouring out her whole life in the blessing of Jesus. Man, I love this. Don't you love this woman and what she did? I wish I could bless Jesus in the way that she did. Maybe you wish that too. In our time, we can't bless Jesus that way that she did, but Jesus tells us clearly how we can do that. And that's by blessing our brothers and sisters, by blessing out the people around us. Can we have the courage and grace that she has to do that for the people around us? Can we have the courage and the grace to acknowledge those who are dying, to acknowledge those who are suffering, to acknowledge those who are in pain, and to bless them, to offer a blessing? Maybe that blessing is just presence. Maybe it's just being there. You know that experience, just sitting with someone, just bodily showing up. That is such a blessing. Maybe we bless people with our vulnerability. When someone's dying or suffering or in pain, and we're open and vulnerable, to be able to say, for example, I'm afraid too. Yeah, I'm scared too. To be vulnerable, to be open with people is such a blessing and helps us to feel less isolated, less alone. Sometimes the blessing can be just listening to how someone feels, to where they are, to what their story is, without the need to have words or to come up with wise words or to try to cheer them up, but just to listen, just to be with them. Mary pours this bottle out, She pours herself out in the blessing of Jesus. And I know that all of you know something about pouring yourself out as we pour ourselves out for people we love and care about. Some of you who are parents know about pouring yourself out for your kids, your time, your energy, your love, your money. You pour it out for the blessing and the uplifting of your children. Maybe some of you are doing that right now for your grandchildren as you fly around the country and do different things to show up for them, to be there for them. Maybe you had a vision of yourself in retirement years sitting on a beach in Tahiti with a pina colada, but instead you're picking kids up from school and babysitting and doing that great work. You're blessing them and pouring yourself out. We do this for our spouses and for our parents, for those of you who are taking care of parents and loving them and blessing them in their later years. Such a beautiful thing to offer that blessing. You know about pouring yourself out. And this woman, I think because of her actions to Jesus, I think because of her actions of pouring herself out, that Jesus, I think he feels heard. He didn't feel heard by the disciples. I think he feels heard. I think Jesus now feels known. I think he feels less alone. And I think in the days to come, when Jesus is arrested, imprisoned, when Jesus is beaten, when he carries a cross through the streets of Jerusalem, I think he carries this woman with him. And he carries her blessing with him. And I think it gives him strength for the journey. I think it gives him strength on the road that he walks. You know, when Jesus was on the cross and he breathed his last, when his heart had stopped beating, when everything became silent, you know what remained? That perfume. It was still in his hair. It was still soft on his skin. Jesus on the cross smelled of that sweet perfume. And folks, may we learn how to bless each other in this way. May we bless each other in this way in our living and in our dying. May we pour ourselves out and love each other in extravagant ways. Because while we can't find a way around the cemetery, like Jesus, we can journey through it. And as we journey through it, we will feel the pain. We'll feel the hot tears that run down our cheeks. And yet, in the midst of that, there will be something else in the air. Maybe you will call it hope. Maybe we can call it faith, but it will be there. And if we pay attention, maybe we'll smell it softly in the breeze. Yeah, there it is. That sweet scent of perfume. Blessings to you on this journey of life and faith.